Welcome back to the Grab Your Gear weekly podcast, where we speak to people who get up and build stuff every single day. So if you're one of those people, if you watch our show, we really appreciate you tuning in this week. As always, hosted by yours truly, Joe Staton and Jack Windsor from the Windsor Report and Ohio Press Network, the editor-in-chief. And Jack, we've had quite another week. It seems like every week is just packed with news as we have a new administration, a new president, really a new face of geopolitics, as I always say. He's in the seat of the world, really, in a lot of ways. So I know we're going to talk about immigration today. We're going to talk about some of the moves he's already made. But first of all, how's your week going, and what have you been following this week?
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for the intro. My week is going great. I frankly don't know how to not look like an overwhelmed newscaster. The reality, Joe, is that you need a scorecard for everything that Trump has done in the first week. I mean, I was flipping through some of the things here. First of all, we talked last week. As soon as he was inaugurated, he went to the parade. And then at the end of the parade, he sat on stage and signed 8 executive orders. And I mean, he's done some big things like pulling the United States out of the World Health Organization, declaring an energy emergency, declaring the southern border an emergency situation, national emergency. And he deployed thousands of troops there, ordered the construction of the border wall, ordered Homeland Security to remove illegal migrants. And he wants to go after drug cartels who he has designated as terrorists. And, you know, he's taken away security from people like Mike Pompeo and Anthony Fauci. He's fired thousands of government employees and indicated this week that they're going to tighten the budget in terms of government handouts. He's put in place a federal hiring freeze. I mean, it's just one thing after another. And I know we're going to get into the immigration thing, but genuinely, unless you have a scorecard, it's hard to keep track of anything. I'm curious if there's anything that's risen to the top for you, as if you've been consuming these news stories as much as I have, I'm sure.
Yeah, I kind of have a personal anecdote. I was just traveling in Florida recently, actually yesterday, and I stopped at a Five Guys because, you know, Five Guys is one of the restaurants that does not use the toxic seed oils. And
Yep.
a lot of people hate their prices. I like their burgers, and they use decent ingredients. But I stopped in, and their staff, which was mainly young African-American men and women, were talking about Trump. And they were like, man, President Trump ain't messing around, you know, and talking about all the things he's doing. And I think it's just reflective of the expanding demographic that he has brought into this coalition. But what I was following yesterday, specifically the new press secretary, the press conference, and just this whole story of the pause on federal funding and kind of the fundamental question of whether the president has the ability to put a pause on funding, or really, I guess maybe in some terms, to execute the funding that Congress allocates. I know we had $50 million going to condoms in Gaza. We had, I think, $37 million going to the World Health Organization, which is notorious for their globalist overreach during COVID. And so those are a couple stories I've been following. And I've also been following, Jack, on Twitter every single day. I see the White House, not ICE, you know, not Border Patrol. The White House is tweeting out daily totals of the amount of illegal immigrants that they have arrested and detained, and some that have been deported. So maybe this is where I'll throw it to you to open up the immigration topic. But yeah, I just think it's such a vast difference from the previous administration. I saw President Trump post a statistic where under his administration already, the amount of encounters at the border of illegal immigrants has dropped 90%. So I think not only are we getting people here that are illegally out of the country, but we are also deterring those from even coming here in the first place. And I guess that's where I'll throw it to you, Jack, where you find interesting in the immigration topic.
Yeah, immigration is interesting to me because I've said in the past, and I'm going to say it now, and people are going to get tired of me saying it, but immigration to me is kind of the next abortion thing. You know, the left tries to use certain issues to create a vitriolic reaction and drum up emotion. And now I think immigration is that thing. Particularly, they're going to talk about children and the vulnerable that Trump is going to go after and deport. But ever since he took office, ICE has been on a roll. And by the way, this isn't something new. John Fetterman said this on The View just the other day. I mean, Trump told you what he's going to do, and now he's doing it. And I believe as of yesterday, 969 illegal immigrants were arrested on the 27th, according to the president. And with those arrests, however, comes heel dragging. And I think it's important to point out, and this is where I think there's going to be a significant number of stories in the days ahead. One of the first things that Trump did his first week of office was he threatened to prosecute officials and strip funding from sanctuary cities. And I actually want to read this because I thought, well, okay, to your point, is he able to do that? And so, if you'll bear with me for just a minute, this will kind of parlay over into what I think one of the top stories, at least out of Ohio, is. But it says the Supremacy Clause and other authorities require state and local actors to comply with the executive branch's immigration and enforcement initiatives. Federal law prohibits state and local actors from resisting, obstructing, and otherwise failing to comply with lawful immigration related commands and requests pursuant to, for example, the president's extensive and Article 2 authority with respect to foreign affairs and national security. And it goes on and on and on. And the reason why that is interesting, Joe, and where I think this is going to get really touch and go is that last night I was sitting in front of my computer and I got an email from a Columbus City Schools staff member. And that person forwarded me an email message that was sent out by Columbus City Schools superintendent. And this staff member said, I wanted to share with you the recent district email sent out to all staff on, quote, ICE raids and the response from Columbus City Schools. And this person went on to write, I have forwarded you their plans as it seems they are willing to go to any lengths to protect illegal immigrant families from the law. I find it incredible how much they're putting illegal immigrant students over American children who need all the resources necessary. And if you'll just entertain me for 30 more seconds here, it's a very lengthy email. If you get up to the Ohio Press Network, that's going to be today's top story regarding the Columbus City Schools and their superintendent and her email. But the email starts this way. As I stated last week, Columbus City Schools remains fully committed to providing safe learning environments for students regardless of immigration status. And I think that is what gave the staff member heartburn. And the email then goes on to highlight things like know your rights. If you need media guidance, who's here? This is who you call. What to do if a government official arrives. And here's the interesting part. The superintendent listed board policies. And one of the board policies listed, it says that the school system is committed to protecting a student's privacy rights. And then right after that, CCS is committed to being an inclusive, diverse, and equity-centered institution and will not tolerate discrimination, harassment, bullying, or intimidation based on immigration status. So to me, it appears, and this was the proverbial question, and readers will have to ask themselves this as they get up to the Ohio Press Network and read this story. Is this wise preparation? Or is this a superintendent really trying to get people prepared for lawlessness in the school district? And it's going to be interesting to see if that is the case, because there certainly will be a clash of forces.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of something I heard yesterday, I believe during the press conference with Caroline Leavitt, the new press secretary. And it was somebody asking the question about like child separation, and I was just, I think I heard her respond or somebody responded afterward that said, this whole question of child separation is kind of ludicrous because when you think about it, if somebody in America, an American citizen, if a father or a mother commits a crime, they're going to go to prison and they're going to be separated from their child. That's a consequence of committing a crime. It's not specific to immigration, but we've also seen, you mentioned the Columbus City Schools, Jack, but we've seen all over the country. We've seen several mayors. We've seen governors even come out and say that they're not going to help. J.B. Pritzker notoriously has come out from Illinois and said that, they're not going to assist. They're not going to necessarily comply with the federal raids. And I think it's just them trying to get in the way of what's ultimately going to happen. It's really inevitable regardless of what they think about it. But yeah, there is an interesting aspect to this, Jack, because you mentioned the Supremacy Clause. And the reality is that if somebody stands in the way of the federal government, if they legitimately try to obstruct a deportation, they could be subject to the law. They could be subject to litigation, and they could be in legal trouble. And this applies to leaders as well. Governors are not above federal law. Now, I hope, this kind of devolves in the conversation. Maybe I'd like your thoughts on this, but it kind of devolves in the conversation of are we as a country a little bit better than that? I mean, I would prefer that we don't go after governors, sitting governors, and really mayors. I mean, but at the same time, there has to be, some power established. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, should we legitimately consider going after people who are refusing to comply with deportations?
Yes, 100%. Uh, to me, it's we have to get back to really simple blocking and tackling things. And I love the way that my wife puts it. She doesn't get as deep in the weeds as guys like you and me, but she probably feels the same way a lot of our listeners and viewers here do, which is, look, if we don't have a border, we don't have a country. And if we're not going to implement laws, then we have anarchy. And so at some point, the buck has to stop with Trump and this administration, because at the end of the day, if all this ends up being is talk on the campaign trail, not backed up by action, then there are going to be a lot of pissed off Republicans. And 2026 is going to be ugly for everybody, because then it's a matter of, in my book, whoever's going to hand out free shit is the person that's going to get elected in 2026. Because look, if you're not going to have a country, if you're not going to have people follow the law, then whoever's going to rob Peter to pay Paul, I'll be Paul, and I'll get in line to get the handout. Now, the people that are listening to this are not those people, obviously. I'm talking about the 30% generally in the middle, the electorate that both parties try to appeal to during key elections. But the people who are here, obviously, they grab their gear in the morning and they go work their tails off and provide for their families. But I think in their cases, I don't know that I can speak for every one of them, but if I put myself in their steel-toed boots, I would say, well, why vote? Why continue to participate in this process if we're going to have lawlessness and we're not going to have a country? So this is critical. It's crucial. We have to do the things that we're promised.
Yeah, I think that question gets a lot more real, and that conversation gets a lot more real when you're talking about somebody like a child molester, somebody who murdered a child, somebody who
Mhm.
murdered an American citizen, somebody who's drug trafficking, especially human trafficking, and these are the people that these mayors and governors are protecting. It's shameful, right? It's just there's no other word to describe that. Why are you protecting the worst of humanity?
Well, here's what's interesting to me. So you have this superintendent who's really on, uh, I don't know, being proactive now, but in talking about the constitutional rights of the students, right? Well, it's interesting because these same people, these same actors during COVID didn't give a rip about kids having their education disrupted. They didn't give a rip about kids being forced to partake in a medical intervention, namely a mask or a vaccine. So it's always amusing to me that the people who not long ago were really not concerned about anybody's constitutional rights, whether it was a parent's right to say, no, I don't want my kid to wear a mask, or no, I don't want you to have gender conversations with my child, to come out now to pretend to be strong proponents of the Constitution. And then when you look at, I won't go through these numbers, but, I had just a snapshot from a state senator who sent me the results for Columbus City Schools in particular, is the district that we just talked about. 52.3% proficiency across all grades. And, you look at, like, say, the third grade English language arts, 3,000 tests taken, 1,255 proficient, 40.7% proficiency. So, this school really has bigger fish to fry. And I wish that there was a focus on making sure that our kids learned reading, writing, math, and science over some of this stuff.
Yeah, that's not really great numbers to have a reputation and have the weight to try to pull some of these moves that they're pulling. So wow, I didn't even know that. That's atrocious.
It's
Uh,
terrible. It's terrible.
yeah. So the last thing that I quickly want to mention also today, that there's a monumental hearing happening, RFK Jr.'s confirmation hearing. I think this represents not only what the country voted for, but it also represents the divide between Republicans who are principled, I'd say, and those who are protecting their vested interests and their lobbyists. And I think there's probably going to be about really 3 or 4 Republicans to watch: Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Mitch McConnell, a couple others who are kind of swing votes. I know believe it or not, I think Cory Booker has been kind of on the record saying that he's somewhat interested in some of the things RFK supports. So that'll be interesting to see. But this vote is bigger than just RFK, and honestly, we need to stay posted on this, and we're gonna keep reporting on it. Grab Your Gear and OPN, hopefully, to try to keep you guys updated on how this goes, because this is a really big vote happening today. And I guess, Jack, do you have any thoughts on that before we wrap today with the Columbia discussion?
Yeah, I do, and I apologize for being so long-winded today. But this is an important topic to me. I'm not in the shape today that I was, 5 years ago. I used to train quite a bit. I used to eat clean and take natural supplements. And just from that experience, I can tell you that I am just a firm proponent of supporting putting good things in your body, because that produces, healthy outcomes or unhealthy outcomes. And so the thing that excites me about this nomination process and about RFK Jr. is that he's not going to back down from this conversation. A former Congressman, Tim Ryan from Ohio, was out on X the other day, and he posted something like, how does stopping cancer research make America great again? And well, Tim, what it does is it allows us to focus on the food supply. It allows us to focus on drug companies and the things that we put into our bodies that actually cause inflammation, which is, the precursor to cancer. It allows us to get to the root source of the problem. And I think that's why this is such a significant hearing, because we're either going to look at what goes on in this country with respect to our food and our drugs, or we're not. And so, in America, we're great at urgent care. We're great at fixing people when they're sick, but we're not real good at promoting healthy food intake and healthy environments that would actually eliminate, or I wouldn't say eliminate, but cut down on cancers and negative health outcomes. So this is an important topic for me. I know it is for you, because you're based on our conversations in the past, a pretty big proponent of healthy living.
Yeah, I've had quite the experience with chronic illness that I never expected in my life. I was completely healthy and had a bad experience with the pharmaceutical, and opened my eyes. I'm actually reading a book right now from Kelly Means, who advised RFK Jr., called A Good Energy, on metabolic health, and really just how the medical system, the inner workings of our medical system, are completely upside down. Doctors are incentivized to prescribe you medication. They're not incentivized to solve your chronic illness. So RFK Jr. represents the answer and the shift in that conversation. And I don't know. I know that so many Trump voters, really many independents actually, came over to vote for Trump because of RFK. So if Republicans turn their back on this nomination and vote against him, I think there's going to be an uproar. There's a lot of people who are motivated to primary folks who are not going to vote RFK in. He represents really a figure in the movement that brought everybody together. So I wanted to touch on that really quickly. And the last thing I had slated today, Jack, was this whole Columbia move, and really, I mean, more so what it signifies, you know.
Hmm.
And so, if our listeners didn't follow this, on Sunday, Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro, rejected a plane that was coming full of illegal immigrants, and literally immediately, Trump responded and slapped a 25% tariff on them, revoked their government officials' ability to come to the U.S., their visas, and just a couple other things immediately. And then I think within an hour or two, Colombia's president announced that the presidential plane would be used to escort illegal immigrants. And it just shows you right there, would Joe Biden ever do this? No. Would any Democrat ever do this? No Democrat would ever do this. And the left is kind of pointing to this as like a rash reaction of Trump. Oh, we can't trust his judgment. He's being emotional. I see it as peace through strength. I see it as we're not going to tolerate the BS. And I see it as just one example of what we can expect from this president. And the world understands. And I'm going to throw it to you after this, Jack, for final thoughts. But when that man survived that assassination attempt, literally got up with blood on his face and pumped his fist, world leaders are going to remember that image when they mess with the president, or when they try to mess with this country. And this simply was just one example of that, in my opinion.
It's the art of the deal. Anyone who's followed Trump over his entire career knows that the man knows how to negotiate. Now, I'm going to show my age here. I grew up in the 80s, at a time when the movie Karate Kid was, all the rage, Well, since then, there's been one of my guilty pleasures now is this series called Cobra Kai, which is 30, 40 years later, whatever it is, uh, the two antagonists or the two key people in Karate Kid are back in the spotlight. But one of the things that always comes to mind, I think it's Cobra Kai. One of their mottos is "Strike first, strike fast, show no mercy." And that's kind of what this feels like. You strike first, you strike fast, and you show no mercy. And then you create a reaction, you create a response. For so long, we've been accustomed to perfunctory action, where there's kind of soft wording, and then there's really nothing to back it up. And countries steamroll that. Not anymore. And I just add this to the list, and that list is getting long now too, right? The guy up in Canada, he's gone. He and Trump had a coming to Jesus moment, and he's gone. Mexico is told, look, you're going to clamp down on drugs, and then there's a huge fentanyl bust. There's a meeting with Mark Zuckerberg, and he comes out and says we're not going to censor anymore. And oh, Gustavo, if you don't want to follow this, here's a 25% tariff, and then tomorrow we'll move it to 50%. And all of a sudden, yeah, we're fine with you deporting the illegals back to our country. I mean, that's what winners do. And I'll tell you, I can't speak for everybody, but the circles that I'm in, and I recognize, it might be a little bit of an echo chamber. People are going, finally, somebody who says what they're going to do and does what they say they're going to do.
Not only that, but we have I would say, a very lean and efficient administration, and one who knows President Trump, who knows what people to point to and which people to carry out these tasks now. It's been very impressive, the amount of work that's been done. I saw Ben Shapiro tweet last night. It's just jaw dropping. The amount of work that's been done, the efficiency, the speed, and the consistency to conservative principles. I think that's what this country's been really missing for, I don't know how long you want to go back, but when's the last time we actually had a president who truly represented the people and who truly was principled and was not captured by these deep state agencies or ties to, these companies, military industrial complex? Maybe it's JFK, right? John F. Kennedy. Maybe that's the last time we had a president like this, and we know what happened to him. So really need to keep praying for the president, but I'm just grateful to be in this time, like you said, Jack, and it is refreshing to see this. But yeah, we're going to keep reporting these stories as they come through. As always, follow OPN on Twitter. We tweet out a lot of good stuff on a normal basis at Ohio Press. Also follow Jack Windsor at Jack Windsor, 98.9 The Windsor Report. And myself, Joe Staton, on Twitter at Real Joe Staton. And we'll keep bringing you guys these podcasts every Wednesday. Jack, thanks for joining today. We appreciate it. And we will see everybody next Wednesday. Take care.